Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Sam Harden, innovation strategist at Affinity Consulting Group, who taught himself how to code, build a court date search tool that broke the cycle of missed hearings and spiraling consequences, and has spent the last decade reimagining how technology can deliver justice at scale.
Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, Tom Martin. I have the honor today of having Sam Harden on the show. Sam is a friend for many years, and he is an innovation strategist at Affinity Consulting Group. And he has worked in many different areas, in many different ways over the years. I actually, in prepping for this, have just been so impressed with the different types of work that he's done. Everything from working as a lawyer, to working as a lobbyist in relation to Access to Justice organization, also founding his own company, and everything in between. Like, there's just so many different accomplishments. I'm really excited to unpack that and get into it with him. How are you doing today, Sam?
Doing great. It's the end of the day on Friday, so I've reached the stage of my life where I'm like working for the weekend, so we're almost
Right.
there.
You're in Tampa right now, right?
Yes, in Tampa, Florida.
You post so many things that are pretty cool. Like just recently, the April Fool's Day, kind of like Crazy Eddie commercial about hallucinated cases. How did you come up with that one?
I kept thinking like the day before March 31st, I guess, I was like, I would love to do like an April Fool's kind of post or video. And I was messing around on like the Veo, like Google's image thing. And I was like, what I really wanted to do was I was going to like announce a new product for how lawyers can AI proof themselves. And it was going to be like a foil hat. But I didn't go down that road. I was like, that's a little out there. So I decided, what if you could take all of the hallucinated cases that have come up? Like Damien Charlatan has that website catalog of, like different things that have been hallucinated, things like that. I was like, wouldn't it be an interesting project to find all of those case citations and quotes that people are using and see like, what does that body of law look like? Right?
Yeah.
Like, could you create a book at this point? I mean, it wouldn't.
It's over 1,000, right? Like it's over 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have the full opinions, obviously. I mean, I guess you could if you could get AI to hallucinate the full opinions if you tried. But like, see, like, what does AI think the law is when it's dreaming about it? And then that kind of went to, I'll just make an insane commercial with a picture of myself, like talking about selling a case law book of hallucinations. Unfortunately, that's kind of how my brain works sometimes.
I love it. You have your team do something. I like the sound of that, which is, don't sit around cogitating, scratching your head, but actually do something.
I started that Substack I think I started it when I was at Pro Bono Net, but the idea for it, like writing and things like that, I've always enjoyed writing. And it was before I was at Pro Bono Net. I was at the Florida Justice Technology Center, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was the legal technology nonprofit that existed kind of for the state of Florida and for legal aids in the state of Florida. And we did things in other places too, but it was, started in Florida. Joyce Raby, who was the ED, was always talking about like a bias toward action. Instead of just talking about a problem and kind of like mulling over like, well, if we did this, then this bad thing would happen. Or if we did this, this bad thing would happen. Try something, do something. If a problem is really bad and everybody agrees that the problem is bad, the best thing to do is do something. And so I always thought of it as like, I'm on team do something, right? I'm not on team, let's talk about it. Let's, commission a study and then write a report and then not do anything. Let's do something. That's where that came from. The idea of bias toward action, which I always translated into like, be on team, do something.
I think it's great. Too many of us, sit in the sidelines, just see what's going on and think that we're not empowered to take action. And that's the only way that we actually take action for all of us is for each of us to have that courage to do it. Something else that on your Substack, this one was like actually quite a thinker, was Lawtown. So I want to come back to this later, but give everyone a little bit of an overview, but what Lawtown is about.
So Lawtown, I kind of modified the title. I borrowed that phrase from a computer developer named Steve Yegi, who wrote a blog post called Welcome to Gastown. If you're interested in technology and computer programming and you're in the legal field, I really recommend going and finding it. Just Google Welcome to Gastown. It's about like what does AI do when you let it loose in programming? And it's wild. It is like a completely different concept that he's come up with than what the traditional model was. And then like I've read it, like over and over, and I kept thinking, what if lawyers could figure out how to use AI to supercharge what it is they do, and not supercharge like their interactions with the client, but supercharge the stuff that lawyers do, like drafting, redlining, like many different, versions of the same document, review of, tons of records, creating timelines and medical chronologies and all of that stuff, right? All of that, like not mechanistic, but Scrivener type work. What would that look like, right? Could you have a system where the lawyer is the supervisor over their own little AI town of workers, right? That are each like churning through different jobs and things like that. And so that's kind of where that came from. Just thinking about what does one version of the future look like?
Tantalizing. And yeah, something I do want to get back to. But as the audience knows, I love to get into people's personal business, but ask them a little bit about how they grew up and their background stuff. Nothing bad. So you're in Tampa right now, but were you born in Tampa? Where did you grow up?
I was not. I was actually born in California, in Sacramento, at an Air Force base that is now, I think, a FedEx facility. Like it was called Mather Air Force Base. So if you want to steal my identity, there you go. About 2 years after I was born, my parents got divorced, and my mom's family was in Birmingham, and so she moved back to Birmingham with me, and I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama for most of my life. My passport says place of birth, California. I grew up in Birmingham. I had family, in many different places and spent time in different places. So, but Birmingham was kind of where my formative years were.
What was your mom like? Or what is she like?
She's great. She's a pharmacist. I come from a long line of pharmacists. Great grandfather ran his own series of drugstores. She's very, very smart, very intuitive, very creative, and kind of gave me that. I think I got that creativity from her in part. I'd like to think I'm creative.
I think your April Fool's Day commercial testifies to that. So yeah. What was the neighborhood you grew up in like? Just give us like a mental picture of that.
My mom and I, when I was a kid, moved in with my grandparents who lived in Birmingham, and it was in like an old neighborhood in a part of Birmingham. I won't bore you with geography. So I ended up like she was working. I kind of grew up with my grandparents there, and so there weren't like kids in the neighborhood that I played with. I ended up doing a lot of like school activities, soccer, choir, band, like all of that stuff. So I was like on the go as a kid,
Yeah.
all the time.
And what were they like, your grandparents?
They were great grandparents. They were both pharmacists. Like I said, I came from a long line of pharmacists. My grandfather was a pharmacist and then became like a sales rep is the wrong term, but he was like one of the higher level salespeople at Wyeth. It got bought by Pfizer. He was, kind of on the road all the time. My grandmother was at home, but she was also a licensed pharmacist. I don't know if her license was still active. Weirdly, I feel like I'm technically a millennial, maybe an elder millennial, but because I was with my grandparents so much, I feel like I'm Gen X. Because like I grew up like
I will make you honorary Gen X.
I grew up watching like The Munsters and I Dream of Jeannie
Yeah.
and, you know, like The Brady Bunch and like all of those shows, you know, Gilligan's Island, Green Acres, you know, I could keep going, but yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to the club. Okay, let me ask you like a natural question, which is coming from a long line of pharmacists, you you ended up majoring in English and Spanish at the University
Hmm.
of Alabama, right?
Hmm.
So, were there any expectations for you, like pharmacy? That's all you're gonna do, or like what? How did that work out?
I hate to say there were no expectations. There were expectations, you know, every parent, grandparent has expectations for the kids, right? But there I never felt pressured like you should go to pharmacy school. My mom actually was like, you should not think about it. You should do something that you like because you knew like the practice of pharmacy had kind of changed from like the small business apothecary compound
Right.
pharmacy to you know like what we see now with retail and like hospital pharmacists and things like that. Like the profession has changed drastically over the past 100 years. I think my mom pushed me to do what I wanted to do. And the unfortunate thing is, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to be an English professor, but I ended up going to law school. I think there's more than one aspiring English PhD that thinks, well, I got to make some money. So okay,
Yeah. So you
go get a
anticipated my
JD.
next question, which was some of us knew from like an early age, or somebody said you like to argue a lot, so you should be a lawyer. Or some of us it's more practical decision, like I majored in philosophy, so what are you going to do with that? So for you is um, maybe more of a practical thing about picking a profession.
It's a weird story. I was interested in politics. I was interested in advocacy, right? And I had this like rough idea that I could go to law school and I could become involved in like political advocacy or, you know, like trial law. I really wanted to be able to talk in front of people, right? And push for this concept that I had of justice, right? It was like this amorphous thing. I cannot say that back when I applied to law school, I knew this is the type of law I wanted to practice. I had this like amorphous concept. I did not know many lawyers, right? I had watched many lawyers on TV. I had no idea what I was getting into when I went to law school. I had like a rough idea. I thought it'd be like more academic. It kind of was academic. It was kind of different. I was not probably not prepared for law school, honestly. But I had this idea like I wanted to be an advocate. And that ended up translating into I wanted to do trial law. I wanted to be in the courtroom. I wanted to, you know, be that person that is standing up for their client, right? And presenting to the jury, to the judge, you know, like advocating strongly. Um, that's what I wanted to do. Obviously, I don't do that now. I do something very, very different or kind of different.
The spirit of it is the same, like you're doing justice, in all the different ways that that has meaning to help people. I'm curious though, was there anybody either at university or when you went to law school that was influential to you in kind of emphasizing that path or strengthening it?
There is a professor that I had in law school because when I was in law school, I did FSU had an externship program where you could go and like work in the public defender's office or the state attorney's office. I went to the state attorney's office because the way I saw it was you got more trials, or so I heard, if you went to the state attorney's office, right? Like the PD's office didn't get as many trials. I don't know if that was really true, but that was what I heard. The professor who ran that was Larry Krieger. He has written a lot and talked a lot about the value of lawyer as counselor and the value of kind of keeping your head screwed on straight. He's written a lot about this kind of thing. He kind of influenced me there where it was, you know, like you don't have to be guns blazing all the time, you know, putting all your chips in the middle, you know, like you're going to burn yourself out if you do that. And that kind of has influenced me through the years, honestly. There's another professor, Professor Atkinson. He taught property. I took a law and literature class from him. He really had like a different angle on how to think about things. Like our law and literature class, it was like we read books like Remains of the Day, and talked about like what is the role of counselor, and it was very different than read these 10 cases about the rule against perpetuities and then, like cram for the final and then realize you have no idea what it means and then, like go and cry in your car because
The pressure.
you may not have passed property, like
So that's an amazing class. Yeah, I never had that opportunity, but that sounds like a wonderful class to kind of put things in perspective. I saw that after law school that you went kind of down, the path that one does, like some criminal law there. Then you worked at a couple of different law firms. I take it like that didn't light your fire, or did it?
it didn't in the ways that I thought it would. So as I went through law school, I kind of developed this idea that I wanted to be like the idea of being an advocate translated into as I went through law school and did the criminal law externship and all of that. I wanted to do like civil trial work because I had this concept in my mind that it's going to be like this intellectual plus advocacy exercise, that kind of thing. And I went and tried to do it. And I actually enjoyed being in the courtroom and like presenting arguments, like arguing motions, like that sort of thing. But it was such a grind. And I just like, I kept thinking about it and going, I am, you know, just grinding myself down to pursue this goal that is amorphous to me, right? And, I was not taking care of myself, honestly. I was, probably, like mentally stressed all of the time. And it wore on me. And there are lawyers that do it for an entire career, and
Yeah.
God bless them. I could not, right? And I realized that like 5, 6 years in, or however many years, I'd have to look back at my resume at this point. It was just such high stress. And I had a firm with one of my friends who I graduated with from law school, and we did criminal defense and some civil work, like personal injury kind of cases and things like that. And I had been talking with my brother-in-law, who is a computer developer, computer engineer, about some ideas I had. And I was like, technology can solve, like stuff I see all over and over. His one big piece of advice was, well, why not try something? Right? And he sent me some links and said, here's how to learn how to, program in Python. Here's these things. And I started reading. I went, oh my God, like maybe I could build a solution for these problems. And that's kind of like I really wanted to start out doing trial law. And I had that vision of myself. And it like several years in, I just realized like I cannot keep doing this. And so I switched. I made a weird switch to doing legal technology. I don't know that I wish I had done that switch sooner. I think it was necessary for me to go through the crucible. That's kind of where that came from, is like I wanted to do one thing. I wanted to be an advocate. I wanted to be in court. I wanted to do trial law. And it just wasn't what I like. It ground me down. And I realized I had to do something different.
And so the step in your career that's something different is, and it kind of jumps out at you, like Legal Analytics Corporation, right? And so that's like a real left turn. Like, what was the premise of that? What was the thesis?
Yeah. So it was two things. The thing that got me started was, when I was doing criminal defense work, I was in court all the time, which was great, but you're sitting in court and they're doing like, status checks and people have to show up for court. And at that point in time, people weren't showing up for court. And, like not everybody, but, like there was always a significant number of people in any status conference where they would go through and call down the names and people wouldn't be there.
Mm.
Right. And I was sitting there going, well, how do these people know that they're supposed to be in court. If they don't have a lawyer, if you don't have the public defender, your case isn't, it's just like a very low level misdemeanor, or, like that sort of thing. Or it's like first appearance when you're coming in to get, potentially assigned a lawyer if you can't afford one, all of that. And I realized people are getting mailed a summons, right, to court. A lot of
Mm.
people in the criminal justice system don't have a fixed address. Like, they haven't lived in the same place for 10 years. If they're, in the criminal justice system, their address may be wrong in the system. When they got arrested, their driver's license or their ID may have an old address for them, and that's what they're using, or it got mangled, or something is going wrong, right? And then you have people who may have gotten the notice, but they can't get to court, right? They don't have a car. Their license has been suspended. They're not supposed to drive. They have to take the bus. The buses in Tampa, if you've never been to Tampa, there's like 3 buses. That's about it. I kept like mulling this over in my head, and I thought, what if there was an easy way for people to just put in their name or their case number and check their upcoming court date? Like the clerk of court's office had the ability to search court records. Florida is an open record state. We have the Sunshine Law, which means anything, unless it's explicitly provided that it's not public, is public. That means all court records are public if they're not juvenile, if they're not family law. Like there's carve outs there, like criminal cases are public record, right? The dockets are public record, civil cases are public record. And so I went to the clerk of court and talked to their technology people and said, here's what I want to do. I want to create a website and let people search by their case number or their, last name, first name, case number for their court date. And I put it on, like I ended up coding that myself in Python. They, gave me like a CSV of, upcoming court cases with upcoming hearing dates for criminal court. And I pushed that into my app, for lack of a technical term. I won't go into the technical specifics, but I ended up building that and putting it online. I bought the domain name courtdatesearch.com, which was like, wow, I can't believe, no one's thought of this. It ended up making $0, right? Like, that's why no one had thought of it. But it got a lot of traffic. People were using it, and I could, like see usage statistics. I wasn't like monitoring it. I wasn't that sophisticated, but I could tell that people were using it and people are actually getting value out of it. And it ended up like the court clerk said, well, could we use this on our site? And I said, you should just make it yourselves, put it on there. And then they ended up doing that for the county. And I'm really glad they did, because my goal there was, let people figure out information about their case. Let them figure out when to come to court, because if you miss a court date in criminal court and you don't have a prearranged excuse, if you just can't show up or you don't show up because you don't know about it, it starts this spiral, right? Like, you may start out with a driving while license suspended case. You don't show up for your hearing, so the judge issues a warrant, a capias. And if you encounter the police, if you get pulled over driving, obviously you shouldn't be driving, but they also see there's an active warrant for you. So you go to jail. And then you have to wait in jail until your next court date. And while you're waiting in jail, the job that you were working is going, where is this person? Let's just let them go because they haven't shown up for work because you've been arrested, right?
Yeah.
And then you lose your job. You can't pay your rent. All of a sudden you're getting an eviction notice. It starts that spiral. And that's what I wanted to figure out. Like, is there a way to stop that spiral at the source? Obviously, I didn't do an academic study on this. I hope that it helped people, but that was my goal.
I think that's a fantastic goal. I like the idea of it's kind of the butterfly wings that maybe prevents a storm from happening somewhere else in the world. And that seems like a direct line to the work that you did thereafter, working at different access to justice organizations. I mean, Pro Bono Net, VLEX. The consulting that you do right now is related to Lawyerist, right? There's some type of relation there.
I started Legal Analytics Corporation. The idea was I had court date search, and I was also going to do data analysis on court records, right? And so You could see trends, things like that. I was trying to do a version of what, if you're familiar with Docket Alarm, which was acquired by VLEX, I was unaware of Docket Alarm when I started it, right? I think Michael Sander was kind of, doing similar things at the same time, but on federal. I wanted to do it on state, like low level records, because there wasn't really good data on like trends in state courts. Could you say, based on the past 150 cases, the past 1,000 cases before this judge, what's the typical outcome for a case like mine, right? Because when they interact with the justice system, I think a lot of people, they only interact with the justice system once or twice in their entire lives, right? That's kind of my working theory. There are some people who have many different cases, right? They're, like corporate defendants can get sued all the time. McDonald's gets sued for slip and fall and whatever all the time. There are people in the criminal justice system who have been, there over and over time, obviously, but that's a very small minority. I think most people have one or two cases. They have a divorce, they have a DUI, right? In their entire life. And at both points in time, they are operating from an informational disadvantage. They have no idea what is actually typical in a case like theirs. And I think that giving people the power to understand that based on data about what has happened in cases like theirs, like what happens in a typical DUI case, not based on anecdote, but based on, okay, we analyzed the past 3 years of DUI cases. Here's how long they take. Here's the typical, sentence. Here's the typical plea. That's kind of what I wanted to do. That's the value I wanted to bring. And that was like the main product that I wanted to create. I didn't end up creating that product. I got stuck and, stuck on the data availability problem. But that was like the grand scheme that I had, was opening
Yeah.
up, like peering behind the curtain, right, on like, what does the data actually say? And I actually ended up working with Measures for Justice on a criminal justice data initiative in Florida, helping, like craft the legislation that goes into that and then implement, like the data dashboard that they were doing with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I was kind of like involved in that and, like getting all the parties together to talk, which is a fascinating project. It was great. But that was like, I think of that as like, that was the kind of the culmination of what I wanted to do in the years before I worked on that. And then there I moved into working in civil pro bono with the Florida Justice Technology Center and did, like consulting with other groups as well.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, it takes a real systems thinker to want to put that together and then hitting up against a roadblock, but then also like taking action to do something about changing that so it wouldn't be a roadblock, at least for other people, or for that type of initiative going forward. So you've really taken it on yourself to push for justice in the way that you originally envisioned it, right? It may not be the way that you originally had in mind, being like in the courtroom arguing the big case, but this actually multiplies that effect, because you're right. So many people, when they deal with the court system, they don't know what's going on, and it's so stressful because that lack of knowledge is scary. It's scary for anyone. It could be like a medical issue, and you don't know what's going to happen or how it works out, or it could be a court case where your freedom's in jeopardy and you don't know how it's going to work out. I do, want to talk a little bit about your later work with Pro Bono Net and now with consulting. What is something that has been really rewarding to you about that?
I worked with Pro Bono Net for 5 years. I really think that in the civil justice system, I was talking about in the criminal justice system, like people are at an informational disadvantage. The civil justice system is the same way. There are, so many well-intentioned people that want to help with civil justice issues. There's, fantastic legal aid organizations across the country. You work with many of them with LawDroid, but I think of it as being like human capacity limited, right? There's only so many lawyers and staff people, paralegals, intake people, counselors that work at a legal aid organization because their budget is not, they don't have the budget of Google, they don't have the budget of Microsoft. That's the reality. I wish it were not the reality. I wish they could get Google's budget because hell yeah, let's do that. But it's not the world we live in, right? And they're limited by the people that they can staff and pay, living wage. And I think technology lets them expand that sphere of influence dramatically, right? Like instead of having one lawyer be able to serve like a limited number of people, you can have one lawyer plus technology serve a much larger group of people, right? So I kind of thought about my work at Pro Bono Net as trying to enable that. We worked with legal aids all across the country. That's kind of how I wanted that work to go. I also saw like Pro Bono Net runs Law Help, which is a network of informational websites, all across the country, legal information for people for free. And that to me is such a powerful tool. And it's something it's not like, ooh, this is, some new AI tool that creates documents, things like that. It's just information, but it's structured well, it's delivered well. And information is power, especially thinking about people in that informational disadvantage, right?
Yeah.
So being able to help enable that is huge. And that's kind of what excited me about Pro Bono Net is the ability to expand that sphere of influence, right, through technology, because like the justice system is so big and the problems that people have in the justice system are so big, and there's only so many legal aid attorneys that are there that can help. You can only have so many cases because you only have so much time and we don't have the technology. I would rather have a world where legal aid can work more powerfully, right? And get justice for their clients, for more clients, so more people can access the justice system.
Through your work at Pro Bono Net, now Scale Justice, right? You ended up being a senior innovation manager there, and I'd venture to guess probably one of the first in that kind of like that title. What was the focus that you brought to bear on that? The innovation aspect of it, about doing things differently. How did that come into play at Pro Bono Net?
Everybody thinks innovation sounds really cool and it must be really easy, right? Because it's easy to innovate, right? Anybody can say like, well, let's innovate by doing these things. Doing the things is very hard, as you know. Like it's one thing to talk about, well, we can do all these 5 different things. Actually going in and like testing things out and implementing a solution and then being able to go in and say, well, this didn't work the way we thought, right? In anything. People didn't use this tool, as much as we thought, or they used this portion of the tool more than we thought. How can we change it? That is the hard work of innovation. Innovation, I haven't always thought this. I was disabused of the notion early that innovation is easy, right? It sounds really easy. It sounds great. Somebody could write a great LinkedIn post about like, oh, innovation's really easy. Da, da, da. It's not. It is hard. And that's kind of what I worked on at Pro Bono Net, and the tail end of my time there is working with organizations on, well, how do you actually do what you want to do, right? That's like even getting people to think about technology in ways that they hadn't thought about it before is difficult. It's difficult for me. I look at AI now and think like, my God, if I went back 5 years in time and told my younger self, here's what AI can do 5 years from now, I'd tell that person they were crazy, you know? But here we are. So that's what I worked on. What I, like pushed the buttons on was that, to really try and innovate, I think you have to get down into the nitty gritty. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to figure out what's working, what's not.
I'm curious about how that maps over to where we're at now, because the innovation is hard. Like in a sense, it like provides a sense of hope to lawyers to people that are working the access to justice problem, that there's something there to work on hard, that it's not just a matter of flipping the switch on AI and let AI take the wheel. What's your take on that?
I think AI has made a lot of things cheap. I think the hard things still are hard, right? And I'll give you an example. So I've tested out Claude. I have a personal Claude account. I was blown away by Claude Code and Cowork. Before Claude Code and Cowork, or before I got accounts of those, I was using a tool called Anti-Gravity. It's Google's agentic development tool. And if you have like a Google Pro account, you can go and use Anti-Gravity. It writes code for you. And I actually was like playing around with it, and I thought, well, what if I used it to write the pleadings for a fake lawsuit? And so I just told it, hey, I'm a lawyer. I have this client. Here's what happened. Here's the county we're in. Write the complaint and the initial discovery. And it did it. And I went, hold on a minute. It can do that, right? And it did it basically for free under my $20 a month Google AI Pro, whatever the account tier is. It didn't do it in Word. It didn't format it really well. But I went, oh my God, that's astonishing that it can do that. And I actually went and browsed the internet, found the header for the county and the right judicial circuit and brought it back in and used it. I was blown away. And this was 4, 5, 6 months ago, I think, at this point. But that's really easy and cheap, but the hard stuff is still hard, right? How do I actually then turn around and use that well? How do I figure out how to architect the processes for a law firm or for a legal aid organization where we can actually use that without everybody going and saying, haha, I can now use Anti-Gravity, or I can now use Claude, Code, or whatever tool, and do their own thing. If you're in a law firm, you'll recognize the fiefdom problem, right? Where I think Jordan Furlong calls this lawyer hotels, if I remember correctly, where a firm is a collection of lawyers that all kind of do their own thing and have their own files and their own cases and clients, and nobody talks to each other. And if you need something oh, has anybody done this motion before, you end up sending a firm-wide email saying, hey, has anybody done this before? The hard stuff is still hard, because AI is on the scene. That doesn't solve that problem. It makes it worse, or it can, right? Where everybody goes and gets their favorite AI tool, and suddenly they're turbocharged to work inside their own silo still. You can automate a ton of stuff now, but figuring out how the pieces fit together is still really hard. And it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes experimentation, frankly.
Well, I think that naturally segues to the Lawtown concept, because so through the lens that we just talked about, is that the future? Is that something that isn't really going to work because of the hard work that remains? Or is it something that we just need to get used to?
I think it could be any of those, honestly. To give you that,
you don't know, Sam.
Yeah, it depends. I think it is a plausible future, and it's one that we could have. I think it also can go very wrong. What I don't want to have happen is where the business of law gets reduced, or the practice of law gets reduced to a strict idea of the scrivener, right? And then it can be automated away. I don't want that to happen. I think the lawyer's role as counselor, as helper, as advocate still matters, and I hope it still matters in the future. But I worry that lawyers have focused on this idea of, well, the way that I add value is I can redline these contracts, I can create these documents, I can, create this process flow, and that's my value as a lawyer. It's almost the difference between a lawyer as an advocate and LegalZoom, right? If, people will remember when LegalZoom came on the scene and started saying, well, you can draft a will with LegalZoom, and lawyers, they got sued for UPL. The argument was, well, that's the practice of law, things like that. My personal opinion has always been that that's the wrong focus. The practice of law is the counseling, is the advocacy, is the hand-holding, is the talking to the client, making the client understand their options, being that personal helper for people.
Mm.
And I think we need to go back and revisit that idea and say this is where the real value lies, right? So Lawtown is a way of thinking about, could a lawyer take all of the things that they don't want to do, like the rote document review. My clients are apartment complexes, and I'm going in and reviewing changes to their leases or things like that. Is it valuable for the lawyer to sit at their desk and review each piece of paper line by line with a highlighter or a red pen?
Mm.
At this point in time, I don't think it is. I think it's more valuable to have an AI agent be able to go in and run that lawyer's playbook against all of those leases if he or she is reviewing them, and for the lawyer to take that and go to the apartment complex and say, here's the work that we have done, that my law town has done. Here's how I would counsel you, right? And instead of maybe charging by the hour for that, maybe it's a different kind of value delivery, right? And then the lawyer can do more. They can deliver more of that counseling value because they're shifting the focus away from the focus on pure document review, pure scrivening, things like that. And so it automates, and I think of it as like, could I automate the stuff I don't want to do? Right?
Yeah.
Can I give that to a robot and focus on the stuff that I do want to do, which is the advocacy, which is talking to the client, which is figuring out what their problems are, which is helping them with things, right? And being able to let the AI in my little Lawtown instance work for me in that way. Now, I do think like there's ways that it can go haywire and wrong where lawyers think, well, oh, I can set up like AI agents, and then I just like the work slot problem. Like I
Yeah.
worry about that. Truly, that is a big concern. Where like the lawyer is just rubber stamping things, all day. Like you've made the scrivener problem worse by
Yeah.
automating the stuff, and now you're just doing what you don't want to do but faster. So I don't want
Right.
it to be that.
Well, I think the vision of the law town that does the stuff that we don't want to do, that allows us to have a better effect on our clients and ourselves, is a promising one. And I really hope that that comes true. But with the time we have left, I do want to ask you a couple of questions that I ask everyone. And the first one is, clearly, with all of the different things you have going on, you got a lot going on. And one benefit for the audience is learning from different people, like how they deal with that. And so, how do you deal with that? How do you keep a work-life balance?
I wish I had an answer that was like, I read this book and it, like, I know there's a lot of books out there to help with it. I am terrible at work-life balance. I will say that. I will confess that. I have been trying to get back into, I used to do trail running. I haven't run in like 6 months. Yesterday I ran a mile. That was big, right? I didn't run today because I stayed up too late last night working on something, and lo and behold, I didn't do it. Like I didn't wake up. It's really hard. And I think if you follow Ethan Malik, he has this saying like, at some point, if you start working with AI tools, you're going to have a sleepless night or three where you're going,
Mm.
oh my God, what else can I do with this thing? What else can I have it do for me? What if I asked it this? Could it do this? Oh, it looks like it might be able to. And you just keep going with it. Part of my job at Affinity is keeping up with AI and its advancements. And I feel like if you've seen like when Claude, like Anthropic, posts something about a new update to Claude, and people always post the cat with the tinfoil hat that says, I wake up, Anthropic releases a new feature, and that's a circle. I feel like that cat sometimes, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's like it's changing so fast. So it's hard. It's really hard. I wish I did a better job at it. I wish I could say, like, oh yeah, my work life balance is great, because it's not. I'll be 100% honest here. I'm not gonna pull your leg. It's very hard.
But it leads to the last question, which is, you know, right now after doing all of these things, all of the career experience and the stuff you're working on now, what makes it worthwhile for you?
The thing that makes it worth it to me is feeling like I'm having some sort of impact on the delivery of justice, right? Be that through legal aid organizations, be it through enabling lawyers in small law firms with, like working with lawyers, working with affinity with mid-sized firms, like making lawyers, work better, making justice be better. We think of like the justice system, it's like an ecosystem. There's this idea of the trophic cascade, this idea where I can't remember where it was in the West, but they like the wolves had been eliminated, right? Because ranchers didn't want the wolves, jumping the fences and killing their cattle. So they went in and killed a bunch of wolves. But, like the ecosystem started to break down, but then they reintroduced wolves, and the wolves, were hunting the deer that were eating the grass on the banks of the rivers that were eroding, and things like that. And it like that one change had a drastic effect on the ecosystem. And I think that the justice system is kind of like an ecosystem where like small changes can have big impact years later, right? And that's kind of where I hope I have an impact, is figuring out where I can push and where I can pull in the justice ecosystem to have an impact to make it better, right? Like that's kind of what I've decided my goal is. If things are better 10 years from now, I'm happy, right? If, like the justice system's never going to be perfect because humanity's not perfect. But can we make it better as we go along? That makes it worth it to me.
Well, I think that's a laudable goal, and I think you've made an impact, and I'm excited to see how you will continue to do that, Sam.
Thank you. I hope so.
And I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciated it and getting to know you better.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.
And for everyone who's watching, like, how could they learn more about you and the work you're doing?
I write a Substack called Team Do Something. You can search it by my name or by Team Do Something. That's where a lot of my just unfiltered thoughts go at this point in time. I have one in the hopper that I've been mulling over. I've been traveling and I want to get it out on paper, hopefully soon. That's the primary way. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter, all kind of begrudgingly at this point. So just under my name at this point in my life, I'll just use my name for everything. People will know who I am.
Absolutely. And for everyone out there, I'd highly encourage you to check out Team Do Something. It's really different from, I think, what you've read. And it's like having this chat with you. It's very friendly and open, and, it's not scary. So check it out. And with that, thanks again for watching. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.